Mom, I'm sorry.
My family had to buy this house back so that you wouldn't be foreclosed on by the bank.
Don't worry, you won't have to go anywhere.
My son gave my house to his in-laws while I was in the ICU. When I returned, he said, my son hugged me at the door, his tears feeling cold against my cheek. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered. He was sorry, all right. Sorry I hadn't died, because he had just given my $2.5 million house to his in-laws. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The taxi ride home from the hospital had been a blur of gray Portland drizzle streaking across the window. I'd spent 3 weeks in the ICU, a ghost tethered to the world by wires and tubes. Now, returning to the world of the living felt like surfacing from the deep ocean. My legs were weak, and the cane in my hand felt like a foreign appendage. But as the cab turned onto my street, a flicker of strength returned. I saw it, my home. The grand 140-year-old Victorian stood proudly against the moody sky, its intricate woodwork a testament to a bygone era. It was more than a house. It was the fortress of my life, the legacy William and I had built. The heavy oak doors swung open before my hand reached the bell. Adrian, my son, rushed out, his face a carefully constructed mask of anguish. Mom, I'm so sorry. His voice cracked, but his eyes, for a split second, darted past me, betraying a different emotion, fear. I leaned on his arm as he guided me inside. The familiar scent of old books, lemon polish, and damp earth filled my lungs. But something was off. A sterile, floral perfume, Evelyn's scent, had invaded the space. A cloying impostor, Evelyn, my daughter-in-law, glided into view from the living room. She was the picture of gentle concern, her hand wrapped possessively around Adrian's arm. Clara, she cooed. We were so worried. We're so glad you're home. Adrian led me to my favorite armchair by the window. Mom, he began, avoiding my gaze. While you were unresponsive, some things happened. He placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. The top page read, Deed of Transfer. Your investments, they collapsed. The market volatility was unprecedented. I tried to salvage what I could, but your entire nest egg was wiped out. The lie was so audacious, so complete. It was almost impressive. Evelyn knelt beside my chair. Her movements were fluid, predatory. My family stepped in to help Clara. We had to buy the house to save it from foreclosure. She placed her cool hand on mine. Don't you worry. You won't have to go anywhere. We'll take care of you. Her voice was pure venom wrapped in silk. That's when I saw them. Sparkling on her earlobes were my pearl earrings, the ones William had given me on our 30th anniversary. I remembered his smile that day, the weight of the small box in my hand. Seeing them on her felt like a desecration. From the direction of the kitchen, I heard a low chuckle, followed by the clink of wine glasses. Victor and Lorraine Hart, Evelyn's parents, vultures already picking at the corpse of my life. The initial shock, the raw pain of my son's betrayal, began to recede. It was replaced by an icy calm, a familiar feeling from my old life as a fraud investigator. The switch flipped. The grieving mother stepped back, and the analyst took her place. I surveyed the scene, the actors, the props, the flawlessly executed script. I drew a slow, shaky breath, making sure it sounded convincing. Everything, I said, my voice a whisper. It all happened so fast. They gave me my old bedroom, but it wasn't mine anymore. Evelyn, with her impeccable soulless taste, had already remade it. My heavy velvet curtains were replaced with flimsy white linen ones that did nothing to block the persistent glow of the streetlights. The worn, comfortable quilt my grandmother had made was gone, swapped for a stiff, hotel-style duvet. My collection of antique books on the nightstand had vanished, replaced by a single generic glass vase with a wilting orchid. I was a guest in the museum of my own life. For 2 days, I played the part of the broken woman. I moved slowly, my hand trembling on my cane. I let my eyes look distant and confused when Evelyn explained, with exaggerated patience, how their generosity was the only thing keeping a roof over my head. I ate the bland, tasteless meals Lorraine brought to my room, nodding meekly when she told me to keep my strength up. I was the perfect picture of a grieving widow who had lost everything, her health, her wealth, and now her dignity. Adrian watched me with a pained expression, a mixture of guilt and a desperate need to believe he'd done the right thing. He was a fool, but he was my fool, and my heart ached for the boy he used to be. But when the house fell silent, long after the last condescending good night had been offered, the real Clara Winslow emerged. The frail old woman was a phantom, and the hunter took her place. Tonight, the grandfather clock in the hall struck 2. The house was dead to the world. I slipped out of bed, my movements silent and sure. From the bottom of my wardrobe, tucked beneath a stack of old sweaters, I pulled out my laptop. It was an old, heavy thing, a dinosaur by today's standards, but its outdated appearance was its camouflage. This machine was my private arsenal. I didn't bother with the public Wi-Fi network they had set up. I tethered the laptop to a small encrypted mobile hotspot I kept for emergencies. Then I opened a command line interface. The black screen with its green text a familiar and comforting sight. I wasn't logging into my Wells Fargo portal or my Charles Schwab account. That was the front door, and I knew for a fact that Evelyn was smart enough not to leave muddy footprints on the welcome mat. Years ago, I had built a private financial aggregation system for myself. It was a back-end program that scraped data directly from the core transaction logs of my accounts, bypassing the glossy user interfaces. It was my own personal ghost in the machine, a system that showed not just what was in my accounts, but the digital DNA of every single transaction. My fingers, no longer trembling, flew across the keyboard. I typed in a series of commands, each one protected by a password that changed daily based on an algorithm only I understood. A wall of data began to scroll across the screen. It was raw, unfiltered, and beautiful in its honesty. There it was, the liquidation. My entire portfolio, blue chip stocks, municipal bonds, decades of careful, patient investing, had been sold off in a single brutal transaction 3 days after I was admitted to the ICU. The sale was executed with ruthless efficiency. My breath caught, not in a gasp of shock, but in a moment of cold appreciation for the technical skill involved. Then I followed the money. The funds hadn't been transferred to a simple checking account. They had been wired through a series of shell corporations before landing in their final destination, a private trust in the Cayman Islands. The name of the trust glowed on the screen, a final insult. Heart Heritage. I leaned back in my chair, a chill creeping over me that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. The final piece of the puzzle was the authorization. My digital signature, C. Winslow, was affixed to the primary transfer order. It was perfect, frighteningly perfect. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my identity, my digital ghost, and made it do their bidding. The devil, as they say, is in the details, and this detail was a masterpiece of forgery. There was no panic. There were no tears. That performance was for my audience downstairs. In the silent darkness of my room, there was only the cold, hard clarity of the truth. This wasn't a simple case of a greedy daughter-in-law. This was calculated. This was personal. This was revenge. I stared at the 2 words on the screen. Heart Heritage. I murmured into the quiet room. Interesting. Across the room, on the mantelpiece, William's old carriage clock ticked on, a steady, rhythmic sound in the oppressive silence. It was no longer just marking the time. It was counting down. The game had just begun. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a quintessential Portland perfume. I sat on the old wooden swing in the backyard, my fingers wrapped around the cold, familiar chains. William had hung this swing for me the summer Adrian was born. We'd spent countless hours here, pushing our son, listening to his laughter echo through the tall Douglas firs that guarded our property. Now, the gentle back and forth motion felt like a mockery, a pendulum swinging between a life that was stolen and a future that was terrifyingly blank. The back door creaked open and Adrian appeared, a steaming mug in each hand. He was trying so hard, playing the part of the dutiful son. He offered me a mug, his smile strained. "I thought you might be cold, Mom." "It's just chamomile." I took it, my fingers brushing his. His hand was clammy. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice soft and frail. I took a sip, the warm liquid doing little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic squeak of the swing and the distant hum of city traffic. It was time to test the foundations of their lie. "Adrian," I began, my tone casual, as if the thought had just drifted into my head. "Evelyn is so clever with finances. That trust she set up for us. What was it called again? Something about a legacy?" I looked at him, my eyes wide with feigned innocence. The heart heritage, was it? The effect was instantaneous. He flinched as if I'd struck him. The color drained from his face, and the mug in his hand rattled against its saucer. He was a terrible liar. Always had been. It took him a second to recover, to rebuild the wall. "Heart heritage?" He forced a laugh, a hollow, ugly sound. "Mom, what are you talking about? You must have misheard something. You've been through a lot. Your mind is probably just jumbled." He was trying to gaslight me, my own son. "No, I'm quite sure that was the name." I pressed gently, still playing the confused old woman. It sounded so official. "It's in the Cayman Islands, isn't it? That seems so exotic." Panic flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by a hot, defensive anger. "Look, Mom, you don't understand this stuff. It's complicated. Evelyn is a financial wizard. She had to move things around, create firewalls, protect what little we have left. She was just restructuring things to keep us safe." He stood up, pacing in front of the swing. "You should be thanking her. She's the only reason we're not out on the street right now." His voice rose with each word, a desperate crescendo of someone trying to convince himself as much as me. "She saved me, Mom. She saved this whole family." As if summoned by his cry, the back door opened again. Evelyn stood there, a vision in a cashmere sweater, her expression one of deep concern. Her timing was, as always, impeccable. She glided across the damp lawn and wrapped her arms around Adrian from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Is everything all right, darling?" she asked, her voice a soothing balm. Her eyes, however, were locked on mine. And in their depths, I saw no concern. I saw a warning. It was a look of both pity and utter contempt, the kind a zookeeper might give a senile old lion who still thought it was king of the jungle. It said, "You are irrelevant. He is mine now." I felt it then, a physical sensation, as if a thick, soundproof wall of glass had just descended between me and my son. He was on one side, trapped in her embrace, and I was on the other, alone in the cold. He wasn't just her accomplice. He was her shield, her believer, her fiercest protector. The pain of that realization was a sharp physical blow, worse than any financial loss. It was the agony of a mother who sees her child willingly walk into the arms of his own destroyer. My anger, which had been a low, simmering heat, now blazed. But it was a cold fire. The anger of being betrayed was eclipsed by the fury of being underestimated. They looked at me and saw a relic, a confused, frail old woman to be managed and placated. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I looked at Adrian, my son, the boy I had pushed on this very swing. But the boy was gone. As he leaned into his wife's embrace, his eyes met mine, and I saw nothing of him left. All I could see was her reflection. For 3 days, I was a ghost in my own home, observing, listening, and never letting the mask slip. On the 4th day, I decided it was time to leave the fortress. At breakfast, I made a show of looking through a local gardening magazine, sighing with theatrical wistfulness. "You know," I said to Evelyn as she measured out her organic chia seeds, "I think I need a project, something to keep my mind busy. The public library has a wonderful section on historical Portland gardens. I think I'll take a walk over there." Evelyn looked up, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. But my performance was flawless. I looked like a woman grasping at straws, trying to find a simple hobby to distract from her monumental loss. "That's a lovely idea, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just don't overdo it. And take your phone." I smiled weakly. "Of course, dear." I didn't mention that the phone she'd given me was a simple flip phone with no internet access, a digital leash designed to track my location, not to empower me. It was perfect. The walk to the Multnomah County Central Library was a welcome reprieve. The cool, misty air felt clean in my lungs, washing away the cloying scent of Evelyn's perfume that now permeated my house. The library itself was a sanctuary of anonymity, a grand old building filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages and the low hum of computers. It was the perfect place to disappear in plain sight. I bypassed the gardening section entirely and made my way to the public computer terminals on the 2nd floor. I found a station in a secluded corner, flanked by towering shelves of reference books. I took out the large format copy of the Oregonian I'd brought with me and spread it out on the desk, creating a makeshift privacy screen. To anyone glancing over, I was just an old woman catching up on the news. My hands were steady as I navigated to a browser I'd loaded onto a tiny, disguised USB stick. It routed my connection through a series of international proxies, making my digital footprint untraceable. I wasn't just logging into a burner email. I was accessing a ghost account on a server that technically didn't exist, a system William and I had designed years ago for communicating when we were working on sensitive cases. It was a digital dead drop. The login required a 3-part authentication key, a password, a physical token I kept disguised as a button on my coat, and a one-time code generated by an algorithm linked to the day's closing price of the Nikkei 225. Overkill, perhaps, but William always used to say, "It's only overkill until you need it." Once inside, I opened a new message. The interface was stark, just black and white text. No frills, no metadata. I left the subject line blank. In the body, I attached a single image I had stored on the drive. A stark, black and white photograph of a lone black pawn on a chessboard. Beneath it, I typed 5 words. Ghost Protocol. Start with Victor Hart, the black pawn. In chess, it's the most numerous and least powerful piece, often sacrificed without a second thought to protect a more valuable player or to gain a strategic advantage. It was how the Harts saw Adrian, and by extension, me. We were expendable, a means to an end. This single image would tell my friend everything she needed to know about the stakes of this game. I hit send. The message vanished, and the system automatically logged me out, wiping any trace of my session. I folded my newspaper, removed my USB drive, and walked away from the terminal. My work here was done. Miles away, in a sleek downtown office overlooking the Willamette River, Harriet Cole was reviewing a deposition. At 70, Harriet was a lioness of the legal world, sharp, feared, and fiercely loyal. A small, discreet notification chimed on her desktop. It wasn't an email or a text. It was an alert from a custom-built application she and I had shared for decades. She saw the sender ID, a meaningless string of alphanumeric characters, and her focus sharpened. She clicked it open. The black pawn filled her screen, followed by the 5 words. Her expression didn't change, but a cold fire ignited in her eyes. She understood instantly. Ghost Protocol was our code red. It meant I was compromised, operating behind enemy lines, and completely off the grid. It meant she was not to contact me under any circumstances. She was now my proxy in the world, my general moving my pieces on the board while I was trapped in the castle. Start with Victor Hart wasn't a suggestion. It was the first target. Harriet closed the message. As designed, it immediately self-destructed, leaving no trace it had ever existed. She didn't call me. She didn't hesitate. She swiveled in her leather chair, her gaze fixed on the rain-swept city below. Then, with methodical precision, she opened her firm's secure server and created a new case file. She named it Winslow Estate Query. She locked it down with the highest security protocols, accessible only by her. The wheels of justice, my justice, were now officially in motion. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The basement smelled of time itself. A thick, heavy scent of damp concrete, decaying paper, and a century of forgotten things. It was William's domain, a catacomb of carefully labeled boxes containing the artifacts of his life's work. To Evelyn and her parents, it was just a dusty cellar. To me, it was an archive. And I was about to access its most critical file. I needed a plausible excuse to be down there, a reason that fit my role as a woman adrift in memories. "Evelyn, dear," I had said over lunch, my voice wavering slightly. "I was just thinking, Adrian's baby pictures. I think they're in an old trunk in the basement. I'd so love to see them." Evelyn had waved a dismissive hand, her attention fixed on her phone. "Whatever you like, Clara. Just be careful on those stairs. We wouldn't want you to have another fall." The threat was veiled, but it was there. Now, under the dim glow of a single bare bulb, I made my way through the labyrinth of boxes. I found the trunk of photo albums easily enough and spent a few minutes flipping through them, a genuine pang of nostalgia hitting me as I saw Adrian's gap-toothed grin. But I wasn't here for photographs. My target was a tall, metal shelving unit at the far end of the room, groaning under the weight of dozens of identical file boxes. They were labeled by year: Winslow and Associates, Financials, 1995, 1996, 1997. This was the heart of the archive. I reached for a box on a high shelf, pretending to struggle with its weight. My hand slipped. The box tipped, teetering for a dramatic moment before crashing to the floor, spilling a cascade of manila folders and loose papers across the dusty concrete. "Oh, goodness!" I cried out to the empty room, my voice echoing in the silence. It was the perfect cover. I knelt down, my knees protesting, and began the slow, deliberate process of cleaning up my mess. I sorted through old invoices and tax returns, my mind a million miles away. My hand searched for a specific texture, a particular weight, and then I felt it. Tucked between a folder of quarterly reports and a stack of bank statements was a slim, leather-bound journal. My breath hitched. It was William's private ledger, not for money, but for thoughts, for suspicions, for the things he couldn't commit to an official company document. I ran my thumb over the worn, supple leather. Opening it felt like opening a door to the past. His handwriting filled the pages, a strong, decisive script that was as familiar to me as my own reflection. I didn't need the index he'd meticulously created in the front. My fingers knew exactly where to go. I flipped through the years, past notes on market trends and personnel issues, until I reached the section from 25 years ago. And there was the name, Victor Hart. It wasn't just a name. It was a chapter. Page after page was filled with William's growing unease. He had documented everything. October 12th. Noticed a discrepancy in the quarterly disbursement reports. A payment to a vendor I've never heard of. Oceanic Imports. Victor signed off on it. When I asked, he said it was for a new supply chain initiative. He was slick about it, but something felt off. November 4th. Another payment to Oceanic. Larger this time. I did some digging. The company is a shell, registered in Panama. It has no assets, no employees. It's a ghost. Victor is bleeding the company dry. November 21st. Found the wire transfer requests. He's been siphoning funds for months, moving them offshore. He's building a house of cards, planning to cash out and leave us holding the bag. The sheer audacity of it. He looked me in the eye today and talked about partnership, about legacy. The entries went on. A meticulous, damning account of Victor's treachery. William had discovered the embezzlement, confronted him, and quietly forced him out, allowing him to escape criminal charges to avoid a scandal that would have destroyed their company. The result was Victor's financial ruin, his public disgrace. A deadly light flickered in my mind, illuminating the dark corners of the last few weeks. Everything clicked into place with the cold, hard snap of a lock. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This wasn't about greed. This was a vendetta, a 25-year-old score being settled. They weren't just taking my house. They were salting the earth of the Winslow family, trying to destroy the legacy of the man who had exposed them for the frauds they were. I closed the journal, the soft thud of the leather cover echoing the finality of my realization. I clutched it to my chest. It felt warm, as if William's own righteous anger was radiating from the pages. In that damp, silent basement, I had never felt less alone. My husband was gone, but he had left me a weapon. He had left me a map that showed me exactly where the bodies were buried. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was standing right beside me, telling me it was time to go digging. My daily walks were becoming a crucial part of my performance. I'd move at a snail's pace down the sidewalk, my cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the concrete, my gaze fixed on the cracks in the pavement. I was the picture of a woman lost in the fog of old age and grief. But my eyes missed nothing. I was mapping the territory, noting the new cars, the times people came and went, the subtle shifts in the neighborhood's pulse. I was hunting. This morning, my target was Mr. Henderson, 72 years old, a retired history professor from Reed College, and the unofficial curator of our street's history. His house was directly across from mine, and his front window had a perfect, unobstructed view. He was out front, meticulously pruning his prize-winning roses, a task he performed with the same surgical precision he likely once used on historical texts. I timed my approach perfectly, stumbling slightly on an uneven patch of sidewalk just as I reached his manicured lawn. "Oh my," I breathed, steadying myself. He looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mrs. Winslow, Clara, are you all right?" Yes, just a bit unsteady these days," I said, waving a dismissive hand. I leaned on my cane and gazed at my own house, letting out a long, weary sigh. It's strange, isn't it? To look at your own home and feel like a stranger. Mr. Henderson put down his shears, his expression softening with sympathy. I can only imagine. It must be terribly difficult. This was my opening. It's the changes, I said, shaking my head sadly. The new owners, they're very busy, so many cars coming and going at all hours. I looked at him, my eyes wide and a little lost. It's all so different. I had just lit a match in a room full of dynamite. Mr. Henderson's eyes lit up with the fire of a born observer who finally has an audience. Different is the word for it, Clara, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Not just different, but odd. We're talking black town cars with tinted windows. Very out of place for this neighborhood. And the visitors. I saw your daughter-in-law meeting with some gentlemen a few weeks ago. Looked like foreign investors to me. Very serious. Spoke in what sounded like Mandarin. My heart gave a little jump, but my face remained a mask of passive sadness. This was better than I could have hoped for. You know, he continued, warming to his subject, I've been documenting this street for 20 years. A little hobby of mine, photographing the houses, the seasons, the changes. I find the architectural evolution fascinating. He beamed with pride. You must come in. I'll make us some tea. I can show you what your garden looked like the year you won the City Beautification Award. A real triumph, that was. Oh, I couldn't impose, I demurred weakly. Nonsense. It would be my pleasure. His house was exactly as I'd imagined. Tidy, smelling of old paper and lemon oil, with books stacked on every available surface. He led me to a comfortable study and pulled out a series of thick, leather-bound photo albums. He was the neighborhood's living, breathing security camera. He started with the old photos, and we spent a few minutes reminiscing. Then he moved to the more recent albums. Now, here we are, just last month, he said, tapping a glossy photo. There's one of those black cars I was telling you about. My eyes scanned the page, but it was the photo next to it that made the air leave my lungs. It was a picture of Evelyn, standing on the sidewalk a block from the hospital. She was in a hushed, intense conversation with a woman in nurse's scrubs. In the photo, Evelyn was passing the nurse a thick manila envelope. Your daughter-in-law seems to know one of the nurses from St. Vincent's, Mr. Henderson commented idly. Saw them talking a couple of times, and I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. I kept my expression placid, but inside, my mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. Then he turned the page. And your son, Adrian, he said, his voice softening. Poor boy, he's had a rough go of it. This was the day after you were admitted to the hospital. He looked absolutely gutted. The photograph was a masterpiece of unintentional espionage. It showed Adrian and Evelyn standing near the front porch of my house. Adrian's face was a portrait of pure agony, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was handing Evelyn a small, polished wooden box. I knew that box. It was William's old cigar humidor. After he quit smoking, he used it to store his most precious keepsakes, his father's pocket watch, a medal from his time in the service, the first tooth Adrian ever lost. It was the box of his soul, and my son was handing it over to her, a symbolic, unconditional surrender. A wave of pain, sharp and fierce, shot through me. It was the grief of a mother seeing her son's spirit being broken. But beneath the pain was a surge of cold, hard triumph. This was it. This was the psychological crowbar I needed to pry my son away from her influence. This picture wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. I placed a trembling hand over my heart. Oh my, I whispered. And this time, the tremor was real. So many memories. I left Mr. Henderson's house 20 minutes later my head held high, my steps a little firmer. The kindly old man, in his quest to document the life of a quiet suburban street, had just handed me the keys to the entire kingdom. William's study had been the heart of our home, a sanctuary of leather-bound books, polished mahogany, and the faint, comforting scent of his pipe tobacco. Now, it was Victor Hart's command center. He'd replaced William's antique globe with a gaudy, oversized television permanently tuned to a financial news channel. My husband's treasured landscape paintings were gone. The walls now adorned with framed, motivational posters featuring eagles and mountaintops with words like success and dominance in bold letters. The desecration was so complete it was almost comical. I knew from Harriet's initial discreet inquiries that the Harts were getting desperate. Their hostile takeover was nearly complete, but they were missing a few key documents. Original copies of certain trust agreements William had established decades ago. Without them, their legal claim to some of the more complex assets was shaky. They had been tearing the house apart, under the guise of reorganizing, searching for them. It was time to give them a map. The stage was set at dinner. It was a tense, miserable affair. I'd been pushing my food around my plate, playing the part of the listless, broken woman. Adrian was trying to engage me in conversation, his voice full of a forced cheerfulness that grated on the nerves. Evelyn and her father were barely concealing their impatience, eager to get back to their scheming. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then looked at Adrian, my eyes misty with manufactured nostalgia. "You know, Adrian," I began, my voice a frail whisper. "I was just thinking about your father's old office. He kept so many secrets in that room." Evelyn and Victor froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. They were listening, every word. "Secrets?" Adrian asked, leaning forward. "Oh, silly things, mostly," I said with a dismissive wave of my hand. "But he was always so proud of his little hiding places, like the safe. He was so sure no one would ever find it." "A safe?" Victor's voice was sharp, a predator catching a scent. "What safe?" I looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Oh, hello, Victor. I didn't see you there." I turned back to Adrian. "It's behind the big painting of Mount Hood, dear. He always said it was the safest place in the house." I let out a small, sad laugh. He had such a funny code for it. He said it was a date he knew I'd never forget. I leaned in, lowering my voice so they all had to strain to hear. It was the birthday of the grandchild I always wished for. The barb was for Evelyn. It hit its mark. A flash of anger crossed her face before being replaced by avarice. Adrian just looked confused and hurt, but I knew the hook had been swallowed, line and sinker. That night, I was ready. The bird-watching camera I'd installed 2 days prior was a marvel of miniature technology. I had told Evelyn I wanted to watch a family of robins that had built a nest in the oak tree just outside the study window. She'd rolled her eyes at my senile hobby, but allowed it. The tiny camera, nestled in the corner of the window frame, had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Mount Hood painting. At a little past midnight, my tablet, connected to the camera's secure feed, lit up with movement. The study door creaked open. Evelyn and Victor slipped inside, thick as thieves. They didn't even bother to turn on the lights, using their phone flashlights like a pair of cheap burglars. "Are you sure about this?" Victor whispered, his voice tinny through the tablet speaker. "Of course, I'm sure," Evelyn hissed back. "The old woman is losing her mind. She practically gift-wrapped it for us." They took down the painting, revealing the dark, circular dial of the safe. Evelyn knelt, her fingers expertly turning the dial. I had, of course, made up the combination, but I also knew William. He was a man of habit and sentiment. The real combination was, and always had been, our wedding anniversary. A date I knew the Harts would never think to try. I had opened it myself the previous night and prepared the welcome party. The heavy door swung open with a satisfying thud. Evelyn and Victor leaned in, their faces alight with greedy anticipation, like children on Christmas morning. But the safe was empty, almost. Sitting alone on the velvet-lined shelf was a small retro cassette recorder, the kind from the 1980s. A tiny red light glowed, indicating it was on. For a moment, they just stared, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. Then, a voice filled the silent room. My voice, clear, calm, and cold as ice. "I know what you're looking for," the recording said. "But William Winslow's legacy is not for vultures." I watched on my screen as their faces contorted. The smug triumph vanished, replaced by a wave of shock, then confusion, and finally, the dawning of a cold, primal fear. For the first time, they understood. The game they thought they had won had been a completely different game all along. They weren't the players. They were the pieces. In the darkness of my bedroom, watching their panic-stricken faces on the glowing screen, I allowed myself a small, thin smile. It was the first time I had smiled since I came home. The board was set. My move. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. The flimsy curtain of civility we had all been hiding behind had been ripped away. There were no more forced smiles, no more offers of chamomile tea. The hearts moved through the halls with a new kind of arrogance, a brittle confidence that came from being exposed. The game was in the open now, and they thought they held all the cards. I was sitting in the living room, staring out at the rain when Evelyn entered. She didn't glide in with her usual saccharine grace. She strode. Her movements were sharp, her face a mask of cold fury. The gloves were off. She didn't sit. She stood before me, a predator looming over its cornered prey. "The games are over, Clara," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "The charade is done." I turned my head slowly to meet her gaze. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear." A humorless smile touched her lips. "Don't you? After your little performance in the study? You're a clever woman. I'll give you that. You almost had me fooled." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "You think you're so smart. You and your husband. You sat on your throne of self-righteousness and destroyed my family. You took everything from my father. His business, his reputation, his dignity. You left him with nothing." So there it was, the confession, the raw, festering wound of a 25-year-old grudge. "Your husband exposed a criminal," I said, my voice even. "He stopped a thief from bankrupting a company and ruining the lives of his employees." "He ruined us," she spat, her composure cracking for a second. "And for 20 years, my family has planned. We have waited. We have worked to claw our way back, all for this moment. For the moment, we could take everything from you. Not just the money, the legacy, the house, the very name Winslow. We wanted to salt the earth, and we have." She let that sink in. Then her cold smile returned. She reached into a leather portfolio she was carrying and pulled out a thin file folder. It was old and slightly yellowed. She tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, damning thud. "But I knew you wouldn't go down without a fight," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I knew you'd have some trick up your sleeve. So I prepared a little insurance policy, an ace in the hole." I didn't look at the folder. I kept my eyes locked on hers. "That folder," she said, tapping it with a perfectly manicured finger, "contains the complete file on Adrian's little accident 15 years ago, the hit and run that put that young man in a coma for 6 months." My blood ran cold. I remembered that night vividly. The frantic call from Adrian, his voice choked with panic and tears. He'd sworn he just came upon the scene, that he tried to help. The police had questioned him, but with no other witnesses, they had let him go. The case was never solved. He was so scared, Evelyn purred, savoring the memory. So easy to manipulate. I found him that night, before the police did. I told him I would help him. I paid off the one witness who saw his car leaving the scene. I helped him craft his story. I saved him. She leaned in closer, her voice a venomous hiss. He's been in my debt ever since. He believes he owes me his life. And he does. He just doesn't know that the life he's living is a lie I constructed for him. This was the heart of it, the foundation of her control over my son, a manufactured sin. She straightened up, her victory lap complete. Here is the deal. You will sign the final transfer documents, giving us uncontested control of every last asset tied to the Winslow name. You will do it today, with a smile on your face. In return, this file disappears forever. It gets burned. Adrian gets to live out his life, blissfully ignorant and free. She paused, letting the weight of the ultimatum crush me. But if you refuse, if you continue this little war of yours, this file goes directly to the district attorney. I will testify. The witness I paid off will testify. And your precious son will spend the rest of his life in prison. It was the perfect trap. A mother's ultimate nightmare. My justice, or my son's freedom, my legacy, or his future. She had backed me into a corner and was preparing to deliver the killing blow. She watched me, her eyes glittering with cold, triumphant hatred, waiting for me to break, to weep, to beg. I held her gaze for a long, silent moment. I let the storm of fury and fear rage inside me, but on the surface, I was a sea of glass. Finally, I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. You've calculated this very well, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. Evelyn's ultimatum was a declaration of war. She thought she had launched a nuclear strike, a final unanswerable move that would force my surrender. But in my world, a world of calculated risks and hidden data, there is no such thing as an unanswerable move. There are only new variables. Her threat wasn't a checkmate. It was a clumsy, desperate gambit, and it had given me exactly what I needed. A clear picture of the entire board. I was not looking for a savior. I was looking for a weapon. 2 days later, I was sitting in a quiet corner of a coffee shop downtown. It was one of those quintessentially Portland places, smelling of roasted beans and damp flannel, filled with students hunched over laptops and aspiring novelists scribbling in notebooks. I had arranged the meeting with a single untraceable text from a burner phone. Powell's, 11 a.m. Coffee after? At precisely 11:15, Mark Donovan walked in. He'd filled out since his intern days. The lanky, eager-to-please kid I'd taken under my wing 15 years ago was gone, replaced by a man who wore his FBI-issued suit with a quiet, confident authority. But his eyes, when they saw me, still held the same spark of admiration and respect. "Clara," he said, a warm smile breaking across his face as he slid into the booth opposite me. "It's been too long. You look exactly the same." It was a kind lie. I looked like I'd been through hell and back. "And you look like you're taking over the world, Mark. I hear good things. Economic Crimes Division, yes?" He nodded, a flush of pride on his cheeks. "I had a good teacher." We made small talk for a few minutes, catching up on the years that had passed. Then I leaned forward, my expression turning serious. "Mark, I need to pick your brain. I'm working on a hypothetical case study, a little something to keep the old gray matter from rusting over." He leaned forward too, his focus sharpening. He knew me well enough to know I didn't deal in hypotheticals. I'm all ears. Let's imagine a scenario. I began, my voice low and even. You have a sophisticated, multi-generational fraud. It starts with an old grudge. A family is ruined, and decades later, their children come back for revenge. They target the widow of the man who exposed them. She has a medical emergency, and while she's incapacitated, they use a forged digital signature to liquidate her assets and move them to an offshore trust in a tax haven, let's say the Caymans. Mark listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt. To secure their position, I continued, they've been manipulating the widow's son for years, using a fabricated crime from his past to hold him hostage, ensuring his loyalty and compliance. They've isolated the widow, taken her home, and are now trying to force her to sign away the last of her legacy. It's a fortress of lies, airtight and legally sound on the surface. If you were the agent assigned to this case, where would you even begin to look for a crack? What kind of evidence would you need to blow it wide open? I sat back, taking a sip of my tea. I hadn't accused anyone. I hadn't asked for help. I had simply presented a puzzle to one of the brightest minds I had ever trained. Mark was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was connecting the dots, seeing the ghost of a real case behind my academic exercise. That's one hell of a hypothetical, Clara, he said finally. The best ones always are, I replied. Okay, he said, his voice dropping even lower. The hit-and-run leverage is tricky. Without the supposed witness recanting, it's a he said, she said nightmare. The real vulnerability, the thread you pull to make the whole thing unravel, is the money. It's always the money. He leaned in, his tone shifting from friendly chat to a professional consultation. The offshore trust, the heart heritage, as you called it, a name like that is pure ego. Amateurs. A professional would call it In-N-Out Burger number 23 Holdings. The people running this scheme are arrogant. That's your weak point. They've likely used this same trust structure for other business ventures. If this trust is part of a larger pattern of money laundering or tax evasion, then your family's assets are just one piece of a much bigger criminal enterprise. My heart began to beat a little faster. The FBI can't just subpoena records from the Cayman Islands on a hunch, he explained. But if we were already building a larger case against, say, a ring of international investors known for using Cayman trusts to wash dirty money, and your Heart Heritage Fund happened to be a node in that network, well, then it becomes a federal matter, a big one. The personal vendetta against you would be the thing that brings down their whole house of cards. He was giving me a roadmap. He was telling me what Harriet needed to find. So, if one were to, hypothetically, find evidence that the money used to buy your house came from the same sources as money used in other documented criminal activities, he let the sentence hang in the air. Then it's no longer a family dispute, I finished for him. It's racketeering. Precisely, he said. You wouldn't be a victim asking for help. You'd be a key witness providing the final piece of evidence in a major federal case. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I wasn't a helpless old woman. I was a strategist. I wasn't seeking rescue. I was assembling my army. This meeting had confirmed it. I didn't need someone to fight my battles for me. I just needed the right weapons. And Mark, my brilliant former student, had just handed me the entire arsenal. The dining room table, a solid block of mahogany that had hosted a lifetime of family celebrations, felt like a slab in a morgue. The final transfer documents were spread out across its polished surface, a white flag of my supposed surrender. Victor and Lorraine sat on one side, their faces smug and impatient. Evelyn sat beside Adrian, her hand resting on his arm, the picture of a supportive wife. And Adrian, my son looked hollowed out, his eyes filled with a miserable conflict that tore my heart in two. I had requested this meeting. I told them I was ready. "Let's end this," I'd said, my voice heavy with resignation. They believed they were here to witness my final defeat. They were about to witness an execution. Evelyn slid a pen across the table, a sleek gold fountain pen. Theatrics were her specialty. "Whenever you're ready, Clara." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, cold. I held it over the signature line, my hand trembling just enough to be convincing. I could feel their collective gaze on me, 4 pairs of eyes waiting for the ink to flow, for the final nail to be hammered into the Winslow coffin. I took a deep breath, then set the pen down, deliberately, beside the paper. I turned my gaze from the documents and looked directly at my son. "Before I sign," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the tense silence, "I want you to know the truth, Adrian. The real truth about that night, 15 years ago." Evelyn stiffened. "Clara, don't," she warned, her voice a low hiss. "There's no need to dredge up the past." "Oh, but there is," I said, my eyes never leaving Adrian's. "Because your entire life has been built on a lie, and your mother will not sign away your family's legacy to pay for a crime you never committed." From the pocket of my cardigan, I pulled out a slightly blurry photograph, Mr. Henderson's prize shot. I slid it across the table. It stopped in front of Adrian. It showed a dark sedan, partially obscured by a tree, its license plate unreadable. It was nothing, and it was everything. "What is this?" Adrian asked, his voice confused. "That," I said, "is the car belonging to a man named David Miller. He was a witness. He saw the whole thing. He saw the driver, a drunk teenager in his father's sports car, hit that young man and then speed away. He saw you arrive a minute later, Adrian. He saw you get out of your car, run to the victim, and call for help." The color was draining from Adrian's face. He looked from the photo to Evelyn, a question dawning in his eyes. "Mr. Miller was going to go to the police," I continued, my voice gaining strength, each word a carefully placed stone building a new reality. "But he never made it, because Evelyn here got to him first. She offered him $50,000 in cash, a fortune to a man on the verge of bankruptcy, to disappear, to leave town and never come back. Harriet's investigators found him last week, living in Arizona. His conscience, it turns out, has been eating at him for 15 years. "This is insane," Evelyn snapped, her voice rising. "She's a delusional old woman, Adrian." But Adrian wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his whole world tilting on its axis. "She didn't save you that night, my son," I said, my voice softening with a mother's pain. "She saw an opportunity. She saw a scared, traumatized young man, and she sank her hooks into you. She didn't save you from prison. She put you in one. A prison of guilt and gratitude, with her as the warden. She has owned you ever since." I let the truth settle in the suffocating silence of the room. I could see the gears turning in Adrian's mind, the years of subtle manipulation, the constant reminders of his debt to her, the emotional blackmail. It was all clicking into place. He slowly turned his head to face his wife. The adoration, the worship I had seen in his eyes for years, was gone. It had been replaced by a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Is it true?" Evelyn stared back at him, her mask of composure finally shattering. For a split second, I saw raw, cornered panic in her eyes. She had lost him, the foundation of her entire plan. The emotional leverage she had spent more than a decade building had just crumbled into dust. In that moment of dead, suffocating silence, the only sound was the sleek gold fountain pen rolling off the edge of the table. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, definitive crack that echoed like a gunshot. The play was over. The sound of the gold pen cracking against the floor was the only sound in the universe. Adrian stared at Evelyn, the architecture of his life collapsing in real time behind his eyes. Victor and Lorraine were frozen, their faces pale masks of disbelief. In their minds, this was a momentary setback, a family drama that had spiraled out of control. They still believed they were in charge. That's when the doorbell rang. The chime was sharp, clear, and utterly alien in the suffocating tension of the room. No one moved. It rang again, longer this time, insistent. "Get rid of them," Victor snarled, his composure finally snapping. He thought it was a neighbor, a delivery, some mundane interruption to his moment of triumph. But the front door opened. There was no knock, just the quiet, decisive click of the lock turning. Harriet Cole stepped into the doorway first. She wore a dark gray suit that was tailored like armor, and her expression was one of absolute, unshakable authority. She was not alone. Behind her stood Mark Donovan, and flanking him were two other individuals, a man and a woman, both dressed in dark, functional suits. They had the quiet, watchful stillness of federal agents. Their eyes swept the room, taking in the scene not as a family dispute, but as a crime scene. Victor puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt to regain control. "This is a private residence," he blustered. "You are trespassing. I demand you leave at once." Mark ignored him completely, his gaze fixed on Victor with a kind of professional disinterest. He stepped forward, producing a badge from his jacket. "We're not here about the house," he said, his voice calm and official. He nodded towards the documents on the table. "Frankly, we don't care about your little real estate squabble." He took another step, and the two agents moved with him, their movements fluid and practiced. "Victor Hart," Mark said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You are under arrest for money laundering and conspiracy to commit wire fraud on a federal level." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Money laundering? Federal? This was a different language, a different world from the one the Harts thought they inhabited. Lorraine let out a small, strangled gasp. Evelyn's face went from pale to chalk white. As one of the agents moved behind Victor to cuff his hands, Harriet stepped forward. She didn't look at the Harts. She looked at me and at Adrian. She was here to narrate the end of the story for us. "The Hart Heritage Fund was quite a piece of work," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "A very busy little account. It turns out you weren't the only ones using it, Victor. For the past 18 months, the FBI has been tracking a transnational criminal organization that uses a network of Cayman trusts to wash money from illegal arms sales and narcotics trafficking." She let that sink in. The Harts weren't just crooks. They were swimming in a sewer with sharks. "Those serious Asian gentlemen your neighbor saw," Harriet continued, her gaze unwavering, "were not investors. They were undercover federal agents. The FBI was building a massive RICO case, but they were missing a direct, prosecutable link to the domestic players. They needed one of them to make a mistake." She paused, then delivered the killing blow. "And then you did. You got greedy, and you got personal. You funneled the funds from Clara's liquidated assets, her life savings, through that very same federally monitored trust. You used the machinery of a global criminal enterprise to settle a petty 25-year-old grudge." I watched their faces. The smug confidence, the belief that they were masterminds, evaporated into thin air. It was replaced by the dawning, sickening horror of a chess player who suddenly realizes he's been playing checkers all along, and he's lost. They weren't predators, they were bait. Your little vendetta was the sloppy, final move the FBI was waiting for, Harriet concluded. You provided them with a clean, domestic, and deeply personal crime that was inextricably linked to their international case. You handed them the smoking gun, the missing link, the whole damn thing on a silver platter. You didn't just get caught. You brought down the entire house of cards. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just a victim who had fought back. I was the catalyst. My personal tragedy, my stolen home, my broken-hearted son. This was the unforeseen event, the black swan that had brought a sprawling criminal empire to its knees. The Harts, in their desperate need to destroy the legacy of William Winslow, had inadvertently fulfilled it. My husband had spent his life bringing financial criminals to justice, and now, even in death, he had brought down the biggest of them all. The agents led them away. Victor and Lorraine were silent, their faces slack with shock. Evelyn, as they guided her past me, turned her head. Her eyes met mine one last time. They were filled with a look of pure, undiluted hatred that was so profound it was almost beautiful. She had lost everything, and she knew exactly who to blame. A week later, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. The oppressive, suffocating silence of the Harts had been replaced by a peaceful stillness that felt like a deep, cleansing breath. The cloying scent of Evelyn's perfume was gone, replaced once more by the familiar, comforting aroma of old books, beeswax, and the damp Portland earth. William's study was a sanctuary again. His paintings were back on the walls. His globe was back in its rightful place, and the only sound was the gentle ticking of his old carriage clock on the mantelpiece. The house was mine. It had always been mine. Adrian and I sat in the two leather armchairs facing the fireplace, a space we hadn't shared since he was a boy coming to his father for advice. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't angry. It was the weighted silence of grief, of shame, and of a future that was an unwritten page. He hadn't spoken much in the days since the arrests. He moved through the house like a ghost, his face etched with a kind of profound shame that was more painful to watch than any anger. Finally, he stirred. In his hands, he was holding the small, polished wooden box. William's humidor. He had retrieved it from his and Evelyn's belongings before the police had sealed their new temporary home. He held it out to me, not as a gift, but as an offering, an act of penance. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I let him down. I let you down." I took the box from him. My fingers traced the familiar grain of the wood. "You were a victim, Adrian. You were manipulated in the cruelest way possible." "I should have known," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have seen who she was." "Sometimes we only see what we want to see," I said softly. It was the closest I could come to absolution for now. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled on the faded velvet lining, was not the collection of keepsakes I remembered. They were gone, likely sold or thrown away by Evelyn. In their place lay two simple items, a folded piece of stationery and a small, outdated-looking USB flash drive. My heart ached at the sight of William's strong, familiar handwriting on the folded note. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The note was short, but every word carried the weight of our life together. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and that you are likely facing a battle you did not choose. I have watched you for 40 years. I have seen you unravel problems that would have broken other people. I know your mind. It is the sharpest, most brilliant weapon I have ever known. I know you would never need a shield to protect you, so I have left you a sword." A single tear traced a path down my cheek. A sword. He had always known. He had never seen me as someone who needed protecting, but as an equal, a warrior in my own right. My gaze fell to the USB drive. I took it from the box and walked to the antique desk. I slid it into the port on my old laptop. A single folder appeared on the screen. I clicked it open. It was my life's work. Page after page of documents, schematics, and lines of code filled the screen. It was the complete original patent and source code for the Winslow multi-layer transaction authentication system, the revolutionary fraud detection software I had designed in the final decade of my career. It was the system that had made our firm a legend in the financial world. And, as Harriet's and Mark's investigation had revealed, it was the very system that the criminal organization had stolen a piece of, a pirated, incomplete version they were using to legitimize their laundered money. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, peaceful smile spreading across my face. The victory wasn't getting the house back. The victory wasn't seeing the hearts led away in handcuffs. The true victory was this. It was the realization that the greatest legacy William had left me wasn't his money or his property. It was his unwavering faith in my intellect. He had left me the one weapon that was truly mine, the one thing they could never take away. With this, I didn't just have the power to defend myself. I had the power to dismantle their entire remaining network from the inside out. I looked over at Adrian. He was watching me, his face full of a desperate hope for forgiveness. The anger was gone. The pain was still there, but it was a scar, not an open wound. "We're going to rebuild," I said, my voice clear and strong. "We'll build something new from these ashes." But this time, I met his gaze, my eyes full of a love that was fierce and unconditional. "We do it my way." The house had never really been in danger. It was just bricks and mortar. The true fortress had always been my mind, and its walls had never been breached. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.